areas. I'll give you the examples. Even to the policies, public-private partnership. Government of Sindh takes a lead, is a law, institution has been developed, projects and programs have been undertaken. So there are evaluations, particularly in infrastructure. Scientific evaluation, yes and no, both. But in social sector, if you see the debate of impact evaluation of different programs, particularly in education, since 1990s, as bank is the major partner in education sector of Sindh, we have education sector plans and others. So evaluation of that plan, I really doubt. But of those programs undertaken under that particular umbrella, yes, you have seen those results. And lately, last point would be the poverty reduction initiatives initiated by Government of Sindh since 2008, developing through a project, then program, continuing from 2 union councils of Government of Sindh, spreading it to 17 districts, impact evaluation done by European Union. We have further expanded that program. You know, under that evaluation, we formulated a poverty reduction strategy, a 3-tier poverty reduction strategy, which again is under implementation. So there are things which are going on, and I think with negative and positive externalities, things are moving.
Excellent. Let me move to Dr. Ishrat, and given your wide experience in government but also in academia, today, how would you evaluate how much the culture of evaluation of public policies or programs is ingrained in policy making? How much policymakers rely on evaluations or ask whether things are being evaluated?
Thank you, Naji. It's a great pleasure to be back at IBA and to see some very familiar friends, but most of the people here are newcomers, so I'm glad to be able to participate in this particular conference. Before I answer your question, let me start with the basics. There is a misperception of a direct one-to-one relationship between public policies and the growth outcomes. And let me submit that there are many other factors which affect the growth outcomes. And I'm talking of the growth, inclusive and sustained growth, not just the growth which is a blur. And that depends on initial conditions, on factor endowments, on path dependencies or legacies which you have inherited, on external financing, on exogenous shocks, comparative markets, and then public policies. So the interaction between the various variables is to be understood. And all the growth accounting today is taking into action these particular factors, and as economists we all say all other factors being constant, and then you have the relationship between public policies and growth outcomes. But all other factors do not remain constant. They keep on changing. Therefore, this relationship of one-to-one, I would submit very humbly, is not very defensible. So that is my first point. My second point is that, and you asked the question of impact, I would say the impact of public policies itself has an attribution problem as to, given this particular accounting relationship, how can you attribute any outcome to one single factor when you have a multivariate analysis? So that is why I have a difficulty in attributing the impact of a particular policy on the growth outcomes. Then the public policies are also of 3 different natures. One is the macroeconomic policies, the second is the development policies, and third is the social policies. And intellectual underpinning of these policies is very, very important, because that is the starting point for the practitioners to carry on their work in the designing of the policies and implementing. As you know, Naji, and I think most of the economists know, we have now much convergence on the determinants of development policies and social policies. And I give you one example, which will also answer your question, is that with Oportunidad and Bolsa Familia and now ESAS, there is a very strong evidence that cash assistance to very targeted group of the poor is a very powerful policy and institutional instrument. So there is a convergence as far as the social and development policies are concerned. But there is no convergence as far as the macroeconomic policies are concerned. And there are questions which are being asked whether you should have a fixed exchange rate or a multiple exchange rate, or you should have the taxation which is progressive in nature. Do you have a composition of the public expenditures where there is an efficiency equity trade-off? Some people argue that, you know, efficiency should be the main criteria, equity should not be. And there are questions on financial repression, for example. There are a lot of people who say administered interest rates, which are negative in the real interest rate calculus, should be administered by the central banks, and therefore this will spur. So when you have such a divergence of the views, then for the policymakers, the policy of macroeconomic nature is a matter of judgment. And your judgment can be right or your judgment can be wrong. But I would say what is convergent, or what is, I would say, common sense, that there are some set of unviable policies. And these are unviable policies which are established by debate, by empirical research, and both by academia and empirical work done by the countries themselves. What are they? You cannot continue to have excessive fiscal deficits for a long period of time. You cannot have external borrowing. Keep on financing your recurrent expenditure without forming a capital assets. You cannot have a distorted price structure where the government and not the market determines what the prices of the factors of production or commodities should be. We also know that the exchange rate overvaluation creates export bias, anti-export bias. And we also know that administered as financial repression, as I mentioned, creates inequities, because those who have access to the policymakers or the central bankers benefit from the subsidized interest rates, while the SMEs and the agriculture and poor, they suffer. So I would submit that these are unviable policies which we have to now guard against. So coming to your specific question, I have a lot of difficulties in answering that for a very simple reason. A, as I said, whether the policy design is appropriate or not for the particular conditions. The conditions pandemic happened. So the policies which we had designed for 2019 are no longer going to be valid. But if you continue with those policies, then they become totally irrelevant. Second, whether the policy implementation follows the given course. And as a civil servant, she would bear you out that most of our problems is not in the policy design. We have beautiful policy documents, but it's an implementation. And because there is no accountability for results, no performance indicators where she and her colleagues can be held responsible for policy implementation, you do not get any, efforts for the policy implementation. Then there are political imperatives. Policy reversals take place. You are passing on the prices of the commodities, and all of a sudden you decide that you want to reverse that policy. Now creates a credibility gap as far as the whole policy apparatus is concerned. And finally, I would say whether the policies are fine-tuned or altered in light of the changing circumstances. If they are not fine-tuned or they are not altered, then you have a very different kind of situation as compared to where you had started. So for these reasons, as both a development economist as well as a development practitioner, I find it very difficult to say that these are the policies whose impact has been positive, neutral, or negative. But as I said to you earlier, there are some very positive policies which have made difference in Pakistan. One is the social protection, the SARS program, reaching out to the cash emergency assistance program. Second is the local government. As you devolve powers to the local tiers and you provide them resources, the decision making is very, very beneficial for the people. Resource mobilization takes place at that stage. And this is now from Ghana to Guatemala. There are empirical studies which show that people are willing to pay taxes and fees if they know the benefits are going to be appropriated by them in their territory. So those are some of the examples, and I can go on, but I think I'll have other panelists to comment on this.
Very good. Thank you very much. And before going to Dr. Sandar, I'm going to go over my chair role and just share a thought, because you mentioned something really interesting, that on some topics there is convergence on positive impact, or that it doesn't work, and others not, because they depend on many other things and it's difficult to attribute. Interestingly, I would say that those topics on which there is convergence are precisely topics that have been, by design, have been subject to rigorous impact evaluations. There's many evaluations of Oportunidades or Bolsa Familia or now Ihsas and BISP and other topics like this. And it's no surprise that on these topics now we have enough rigorous evidence, there's convergence. On those where attribution is very difficult, obviously macro policy, but even things like tax exemptions or subsidies to export, these are not sufficiently evaluated. This, in my view, is why you observe many views and subjective judgments on them, and they can be more influenced by politics, in fact. And then your point on who benefits from, a negative interest rate. This simple question, who is really benefiting from policies, at the minimum, should be systematically part of the policy debate. Sorry, I'm stepping on my...
I agree with you. I just wanted to supplement what you said. India had multiple programs for social welfare, starting from unemployment, food subsidy and all. And there were leakages, and there were waste, and there were inefficiencies. The Modi government decided to combine all of them, and then they have this transfer program through Adidar, which is their, like Nadra, the identity card. And there has been an improvement as far as the target group is concerned, where it reaches, and also the efficiency of the use of the resources. So I just wanted to supplement what you said. Even a die-hard country like India, which has been on a very different track, has now come to realize from the empirical evidence that this is the best way to do it.
Dr. Sanva, tell us about your recent work on impact variations, and how much does it generate robust evidence to inform the policy debate or policy making in Pakistan?
Great, thank you. Before I explain some of my work, I just want to acknowledge the organizers, faculty, staff, and especially the students at IBA for putting up such a great conference. It's my first time at IBA. You guys have a lovely campus. And also, it's always great being in Karachi. Karachi is such a diverse and versatile city. I was just joking with my friend Izzar right there that like Lahore, which is the second largest city in the country, seems just so parochial compared to Karachi because of just the sheer diversity that it brings. So it's great to be in your city, the City of Lights. So in terms of, so before I kind of go into some of the impact evaluation work that I've done and also summarize some of the broader work that's been done in Pakistan, I just want to kind of quickly comment on sort of the evolution, the recent evolution in methodologies in impact evaluations. As you rightly pointed out in your opening comments, there's been a significant change in sort of policy and especially the development paradigm, right? In the last 2 decades, since development economists have adopted some of these methodologies from other fields, and especially A/B testing and randomized control trials, we now really have this unique, robust system of gathering not just evidence, but causal evidence of whether particular policy prescriptions work or not, right? So, and you know, it's given us a whole set of ideas on what we think works or doesn't work. And more importantly, what it's done is it's kind of upended our priors on what we thought works, or what would work or what wouldn't work. So for example, let me give you the example from India. For the longest time, they realized that in villages, in sort of low-income households, a lot of people were using these coal cook stoves. And coal cook stoves, you know, cause indoor air pollution, and then that has a series of like health impacts and effects, things like black lung, and then has an impact of cognitive ability, etc. So the idea what they came up was simple enough, which is, hey, you know, let's just transition to cleaner cook stoves, right? Gas, you know, give them cleaner cook stoves that work on gas. Now, and by the way, this work was being done by some of the most like well-known development economists, right? Ramahana and Michael Greenstone, and I think at some point Rohini Pandey was involved in this too. But what they discovered is that households, now this seems simple enough, right? Just give them cleaner cook stoves and suddenly people will be using them. But what the evidence suggests is people are very, very reluctant to actually use them. And over time, people had, even though under this policy program, households were given cleaner cook stoves, within less than a year, households have actually transitioned back to coal cook stoves, right? So now that raises a whole new set of questions that on the surface, it seems your prior is that, you know, technology adoption is pretty straightforward. If you inform households about health impacts, etc., they're bound to kind of like adopt. But then what they now have, but then this policy was effectively, before it was scaled up, and that's important because that ties into something that Dr. Ishit mentioned at some point. Before you scale up, they recognize that, hey, people are not adopting these things, right? They're not adopting the cook stoves. So what explains that? So then they were looking into mechanisms, there's cultural and social norms, what works, for example, in Latin America might not necessarily work in South Asia. So this is the classic problem of what we call external validity. So things really have to be contextual, have to be tested in a particular place where you can control for social and cultural norms. More importantly, control for political and cultural institutions. And so those are the kind of things that as you do more impact evaluations, these are the things that you learn. And these are the things that allow you to iterate over what you've done and improve policy, right? So it's no one-size-fits-all kind of thing. This is a dynamic process which needs to be built upon, and you have to fine-tune and adjust. You know, fine-tune is a word that Dr. Ishit used, and I'm kind of supporting his argument here, that these things have to be adjusted according to the evidence that you're collecting. So it's not that you just do, you know, you come up with a policy design and then you roll the whole thing. You have to first test it out in at a smaller scale, see whether it's working or not, figure out what the kinks are, then try to tweak those, and then think about kind of implementing it at a larger scale, right? So you have to be prepared to alter and change the design at will. Now, some examples from Pakistan. So first, let me quickly give you a quick summary of some of the work I've done, what we've discovered, and things that have surprised us. And then, you know, I'll talk about the cash transfer, the BIS program, and then some of the work that's been done on health and education. So my work predominantly is on the environment, right? So I used to work on water, but now I've really gotten into air pollution because of the atrocious air quality that we Lahoris suffer perennially. So one policy was that, you know, ISIMOD, which is an organization in Nepal, after the earthquake in Nepal in 2015, they came up with this new technology called the zigzag brick kiln, right? And so that became like a fad. And a lot of people from ISIMOD visited Punjab, and they were like, hey, let's convert to these, what they were calling like clean killings, right? So our current kiln technology is what we call the Bull's trench kiln. This is a 150-year-old technology developed by Mr. Bull, who was like this British engineer. He built this first sort of kiln in Bengal, and then it kind of like scaled over to the rest of South Asia. But that's, you know, it's a very polluting technology. It contributes quite a bit to our PM 2.5 levels in the country. So we said, look, before you start even thinking about adopting PM2 zigzag kilns, let's test this out. Do zigzags actually work, right? Luckily for us, there was a kiln owner in Lahore who had like visited Nepal. He was like this kind of, I guess, progressive, what people call a progressive kiln owner. That person ended up had set up a zigzag kiln, and that same person also had a conventional kiln, right? So me and environmental scientist friend of mine, she works at the government college, we went and kind of like started testing both these kilns out. And what we discover is that zigzag kilns are cleaner than Bull's trench kilns, your older technology, but not necessarily clean. They're cleaner, but not clean. And in fact, the emissions from the zigzags still violate the mandates set by the Punjab Environmental Protection Department. So in fact, if you transition to the zigzag, you're still doing something illegal because the zigzags are violating the mandate, right? These are mandated standards. But lo and behold, the Punjab government did exactly that. They went ahead and actually, they claim they've converted all kilns in the province to zigzags. That's not the case. But still, the fact is that, they were sufficiently warned that the outcome that they're trying to measure is not, they were focused on technology adoption, but the main outcome that they should have actually concentrated on was whether this adoption is going to improve air quality in the province or not, right? And it hasn't done that. It hasn't, because like I said, it's still going beyond what the mandated standard is, right? Okay, so that's on kilns. The other thing which we looked at is air pollution information, right? In the developed world, people have willingness to pay for avoidance behavior, right? So people will be willing to, if they know it's a polluted day, they'll get, receive these alerts on their phone, and then your parents will go and pick up their kids and kind of like bring them home, right? So that their kids are not exposed to pollution on a particularly polluted day. But that kind of information doesn't necessarily exist in Pakistan or in South Asia for that matter, and we're much more, and the fact is, it does exist, but a lot of people don't have access to it. Even in Pakistan, when we look at air pollution information, it's through, that Air Visual app. That information is on you can only get that on a smartphone or through the internet, but your average person in the country doesn't have access to these kind of apps, right? So that's what we developed. So this was the policy dose, was, start giving people air pollution information and then test out whether people actually even, like it. Do they even value this information? And what we discovered is that they do. An average sort of lower middle income Lahori is willing to pay up to 100 rupees to receive air pollution forecasts for up to 3 months for a service which will give that person forecasts for up to 3 months. And that is roughly 60% of the cost of 4G mobile internet data, right? It's very, very valuable. That's a tremendous willingness to pay evidence that we received, right? So Lahoris do value avoidance behavior, and that's huge in terms of informing policy, right? That there is this avoidance idea. So I'll stop here and give space to the other panelists. And if you come back to me again, I'll perhaps summarize some of the other evidence on policy evaluation.
Thank you very much. I will come back to you. And examples of evaluations or just measurements that go against our priors are so informative, and I think we don't have enough. I think we learn even more from evaluations that show that things don't work than evaluations, but they don't get enough attention. And I'm going to use a few seconds to give you one example I was involved in of a total failure of an a priori an intervention or a program that you would say, oh, this is exciting. This was in Morocco. We were supporting the government to launch a conditional cash transfer program in rural areas, and in one of the groups that we tested, we put at the entrance of each classroom a little biometric machine to measure presence of children. And they were really excited. Every morning they would go in class and they would put their finger, and there was a nice voice telling them, recognizing their finger and saying, good morning, Sabah al-Khair, Ishrat, or so they really liked it. They were children, and it was a way to know exactly what was the level of absenteeism and to incentivize parents to send the children to school. Total failure. After a few months of the experiment, what happened? 70% of the schools in which we installed these, the machines were broken. So we were wondering whether it was the machine itself, it was a poor implementation. No, it was the teachers. The teachers started destroying these machines because this data would show when they were absent. Because if on a given day you have no children on the Excel data sheet, it would show, so we didn't have an important stakeholder. While a priori designing this program, it sounded like high tech. I got a lot of funding to do it because it sounded really innovative. Total failure because the reality is that one stakeholder did not want it. But measurement, random visits, and a careful evaluation would have not shown that. Let me go back to Dr. Shireen and ask you, in your experience, what are the constraints in Pakistan to do more impact evaluations, let alone rigorous impact evaluations, even measurement and surveys? Why aren't there more evaluations in your experience?
In my personal experience and opinion, if I see that, yes, there are several constraints, but the bigger constraint, which if I say 1, 2, 3, one is institutions, institutions itself. When we run different policies and the rules of business on daily basis for people of the province or country on programmatic mode, then you will find difficulties and your thinking paradigm will be programmatic. You see, we require institutions to run. Giving an example of expanded program of immunization in health sector. So children has to born, they'll continue to born. For how long we will have a program to vaccinate children? Why it is not part of the health sector system? Why it is not institutional? Why we require such programs which requires continuity, infinite continuity? So developing these things around the thinking process of institutions, that is the bigger challenge, you see. And so is the measurement. For example, we do PSLM, we do HIES, we do mixed surveys, we have several indicators, and these are internationally recognized surveys. Instead of doing impact evaluation or evaluations of those small little bit programs, annual development program schemes, PSDP programs, a simple looking at the mixed survey of 2014, just giving an example, that says that birth registration rate in Sindh is around 29%. From that thing, it triggered that it is the usual function of Union Council. So Union Council is not functioning. And local government department, when it started looking just at this number, that given impact, they handhold with some private sector, improved Nadra's connectivity with Union Council, and within 4 years, that the next survey says it is 67%. So even that doesn't require per se impact evaluation as part of planning process. And usually, as I started, when we say evaluation, look at the structure of planning process. What it says about evaluation. It says that when your program ends after 3 to 5 years time, you do evaluation. So I think 5 years is
and are they done? Are they done?
yes, they know, but the reality, as Dr. Ishrat was saying, 5 years is the political term of any government. You know, will you find any person after completing program to wait for 3 years, then go for evaluation of that project? You won't find papers on ground. So how we structure our planning processes, particularly the evaluation part, it is more, in my understanding, if it is process evaluation, that will lead up to the outcome and then evaluation. It can't be in that way that we complete the program, wait for 3 years and go ahead. So you will find several of such examples where simple indicators, simple surveys can tell us the trajectory. Yeah. I have completed 30 years in service. The same 6 million children out of school, I am at least listening since last 15 years. So same is with the help of World Bank, without help of World Bank, European Union supporting it, government of Pakistan, national curriculum, but that 6 million figure is hanging on my head. So what we really are seeing, so the objectivity, the goal, and aligning those programs with those outcomes. Convergence is 100% there. You see, we are not working in education sector as we were working 25 years ago. But we are somewhere, missing the point.
Very clear, very clear. Let me ask you a question to the audience and to the, before we do the Q&A, sorry, just a little parenthesis. There's many surveys that are being conducted. There's a lot of data that's collected. How many, I'm asking the students in particular, or the researchers, the scholars in general, how many find it difficult to access all these surveys, all these data that are produced by the government or the institutions, or how many find it difficult among the scholars who are here? Okay, I take it the rest know how to find it or find it easy. Okay, let me ask Dr. Ishrat, and Dr. Shireen mentioned the planning process and the evaluation that should take place 3-4 years after the end of a program. In your experience in government, I can't resist asking you this. How many times when you were sitting either in a planning decision or decisions on the PSDP or a cabinet meeting, how many times have you seen an evaluation come up and saying, here's the evidence we have on this program, and they're asking for more money, and it's working or it's not working? Is this part of the discussions, and how often does it happen?
Well, it's very sporadic, and sometimes the ECC, for example, or the ECNAC asks the sponsor to justify as to what is the impact of the previous program or the previous project, and then you can justify. But this is very, very unsystematic and depends on who is sitting in the ECC or the, so it's not a, what I call an institutionalized mechanism. Let me tell you why there is such dearth of impact evaluations of the government programs. I, for one, do not believe in this artificial separation between recurrent budget and the development budget. In development budget, you are financing the buildings of schools and equipment and everything without providing for the teachers and the operating expenses of those schools. Now, you may say that I have constructed 500 schools all over the province as it was my job, but what is the outcome? Are the students from those particular localities who were out of school, are they attending the schools? Have the net enrollment ratios have increased? Has the teacher attendance been, very regular? So I personally think that we should have a programmatic approach which is based on outcome rather than inputs. Right now it is all inputs. So we will hire so many teachers, we will build so many structures, but that doesn't work. So if you have a programmatic approach, then evaluation of the outcomes becomes very important and impact can be discerned. But the present system is flawed in my view, and I've been arguing that this is not right. My second point is that even when you have the PSTP projects which are presented to the CDWP or to the ECNEC, you have a difficulty in finding resources for completion. So the throw forward of the PSTP projects or ADB projects is for about 10 years. So you give a little bit of money to this project, give this money to this project, and you have cost overruns and you have time delays. So your original assumption on the cost-benefit analysis, which said that the project will be completed within the cost in 3 years' time, and the benefits will start accruing from year 4, that calculus has totally disappeared. And that is the history of Pakistan's development plans, that most of them have not reached the targets which were given to them because of this very big deficiency in the resource allocation and the inclusion in the PSTP or ADP. My third problem is that the machinery for monitoring the projects, in today's world where technology is really so helpful and you can use that technology in order to monitor it in real time, that has not yet been installed. And you cannot do evaluation unless you do monitoring. The monitoring gives you the tools in order to determine whether you are on the course or you have to alter the course or you have to make some alterations. If you don't do that, then all the difficulties during the implementation are not captured, and therefore the impact evaluation will be almost, I would say, useless and irrelevant. Fourth is the problem that we don't have a continuity in the project units. Although the World Bank has been arguing and the ADB has been saying that you should have a project director in place for the duration of the whole project, you will go and find that some joint secretary or some deputy secretary is also the project director. He cannot do or she cannot do justice because she is already doing what her work is. And therefore, this becomes what I call as a routine kind of filling in the boxes, but it does not really carry the same weight as a useful monitoring system would tell you that this is what needs to be adjusted. And finally, there's a fear of failure among the civil servants, and she will bear me out. No experiment or no project can be always successful. There will be failures. And you learn from failures and you redesign and go ahead. No civil servant, I can bet you, will ever be willing to stick his or her neck out and say, yes, I designed it, but it was a failure. The risk aversion is so high that this will not happen. So for these reasons, I do not think the impact evaluation in the government is as desirable as it should be.
Thank you very much. And the risk of failure or the fear of evaluating, I think, is everywhere. It's true. I can speak for the World Bank. We don't, you know, it's always hard to have your own project being evaluated. So it's a phenomenon. This is why independent units and the role of academia to have external views to evaluate when they can access data is useful, because it's not natural for an owner of a project to self-evaluate what they do. Dr. Sanval, we want to hear more about the excellent and exciting examples of evaluations you're doing.
Okay, so so these are not my sort of, this is not work that I've done, but for the interest of the audience, because there is some exciting work that is being done in Pakistan, so I just wanted to share these examples. So the three basic themes that I've picked. So one is cash transfers, of course, because that's one of our sort of a classic example of a social protection program that has been successful. And then the other two themes are health and education. So on cash transfers, what do we know? So the evaluations that have been done, I do have some criticism of how the transparency of the evaluations, because they've basically been done by a consulting firm and not necessarily academics. But from what I heard, they've done a pretty decent job. But what we've discovered is that they do work mostly, but again, it depends on how you define lifting people above a poverty threshold, right? Is it consumption expenditures that go up because you're giving them an unconditional transfer? But the fact is that what we don't know, so you can lift people above the threshold, but they still fall within a poverty band because folks are still highly vulnerable to shocks, right? So you can have a random climatic shock or a financial shock as a result of something like COVID, for example, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that people are, so giving the cash transfer doesn't necessarily mean that people are permanently out of the poverty kind of threshold. They can still fall, even if they've been successfully lifted, they can go back into the band, right? The other important thing, which we don't know, is the incidence of domestic violence. Transfers are going to now, they give women far more financial agency. But given our sort of cultural constraints and norms, that also raises the risk of domestic violence, right? When men in the household suddenly lose that financial agency and see the spouse or a woman in the household exerting more financial agency, there is the chance of, it increases the risk of men trying to exert control and increase violence, right? Now that is, and there's enough evidence of that from other contexts, but but that hasn't been tested in our case, right? And that's important. So on the one hand, you think you're going to be given cash transfers, but if that's leading to these additional costs, that's incredibly problematic, right? So we need to be thinking about these wide set of outcomes, not just poverty is your primary goal, but along with it comes a whole set of other issues. And so we need to keep focused on that too, right? Things like empowerment and violence, for example. So those haven't necessarily been tested, and I think it's important that we go down that route. On health policies, we've now discovered that stunting and wasting can be improved by, we can improve that by giving people better nutrition. But it's not so straightforward again. Nutrition alone is not enough. It is what it's actually not even a primary order concern. The primary order concern here is dirty water. People don't have access to clean water, and so they are constantly sick with diarrheal diseases, right? And so once you start giving them good nutrition, if they're sick, their bodies aren't actually absorbing all the nutrients, and hence they continue to be sick, and you don't see improvements in these stunting and wasting outcomes, right? So improving nutrition is a decent policy and can have impacts, but simultaneously, you also have to think about access, these wash programs and access to clean water and hygiene, etc. And by the way, just giving a sink and a toilet isn't enough. Hygiene practices, people should be washing their hands constantly. Those are kind of habits and norms that need to be developed and worked on simultaneously. Okay, and the final thing is education, right? So, this LEAPS program with Tahir and Darabi, and Asim Khwaja at EPOD at Harvard, these guys have done tremendous work on trying to understand a marketplace for education in Pakistan and kind of thinking about these broader, large set of education-related issues. And I think the gist of their argument is, and this is done through sort of very, very rigorous field experiments, that low-cost private schools in Pakistan are a far better alternative than public schools. public schools just don't cut it, right? And low-cost private schools are in terms of all kinds of, you can think of all kinds of outcomes, but more importantly, learning outcomes are doing far better than public schools, and there's a solid case to be made for diverting subsidies to these low-cost private schools, right? Because they can train the teachers, they're competitive, and they can manage to address these larger, sort of improve these outcomes. But what we don't know, on the other hand, so there's enough evidence on sort of improving educational outcomes, but what we don't know, for example, and this is a policy now that's been rolled out en masse, is does a uniform curriculum, for example, does that actually lead to systematic improvements in learning outcomes, and not just on average, but across students who are going to different kinds of schools, right? So from your really wealthy private schools to students at the most disadvantaged schools, is a program like that actually designed to lead to any measurable and sustainable improvements in learning outcomes? We just don't have the evidence. We don't know that. All right, so I have something on challenges, but I can come back to that later.
Thanks a lot. And this uniform curriculum is one example of a policy that would be very hard to evaluate. How this would be quite hard to do, I would think.
No experiment designed around
It's not even a control. It must be very hard. Just out of you were speaking about stunting. I can't agree more on the link between access to clean water and stunting. And we are starting a program with the government of Punjab on rural water and sanitation on 2,000 villages, and the objective is explicitly to try to reduce stunting by providing clean water. And the interesting part is that we're working with the government of Punjab to have the rollout among these 2,000 villages is a lot, and it's going to be a 6-year project. The rollout of the villages is going to be random, so we're going to be able to evaluate very rigorously whether that has impact on stunting or not. Okay, I'll stop here. Let me open it to the audience for Q&A, and please do come in, panelists, including with additional examples. All right, so we have one at the back with the hat, 2, 3, and then I'll move to the left. And then the two in the back. So we'll take 3-4 questions. And
good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for making me part of this discussion. I thank you for all the wonderful panelists for your expert opinions. I would like to thank, first of all, Mr. Naji for raising our issue of data inavailability for researchers. It's one of the most important issues which should be raised, not on the general particular level, but on the general level for the researchers. Now my question is for Mr. Dr. Hussain. Since our researchers are for policy makers and you are sitting in front of us, sir, don't you think our economy is facing a lot of crisis, because every government, when it comes to the tenure, they fail in carrying forward the projects of previous government. How many projects PTI government have been taken forward of PMLN's government? This is my first question. And my second question from you is, if we talk about SR's program, it is one of the wonderful programs which is serving the lower middle class of the country. If PTI governments unfortunately falls out tomorrow, so how effective PTI government has made the system that it will be carried forward? Thank you very much.
Well, both questions are interrelated. You must realize that SR's program is a continuation of the Benazir Income Support Program, which was started by the PPP government, and then it was supported by the PMLN government, and it was continued by the PTI government. So there is a continuity all over for the last 12 years. But each government wants to improve it, wants to add other features as our knowledge becomes more intense. For example, we didn't have the stunting program in the BISP, so now SAS has a stunting program for nutrition. We have undergraduate scholarships for needy students, which didn't exist. So all what you're doing is that you are adding to that. But that doesn't mean that you have support for all other projects, because the energy projects, for example, prove to be very controversial because they are based on a policy of take or pay and guaranteed rate of returns. So you have a surplus capacity and you are paying to the power producers for the capacity you're not using. So that kind of project you should either discard or you should modify. So it depends on what kind of situation you are. And it's not PMLN or PPP or anything. It is what is common interest of the majority of the population. That should be the indicator. It is not that you get some things for your own MNAs or MPAs and you make them happy. That's not the purpose of development projects or for any interventions. So my message is that these 5-year electoral cycles are not coterminous with development outcomes. So we should not think in terms of the 5-year electoral cycle, because development takes a long time. The poverty reduction in the world started long time ago, and it's only after 50 to 60 years that we are observing a reduction in the incidence of poverty. So if the program was discontinued in the middle, it won't have produced the results.
The two gentlemen in the back, they were the first ones to raise their
Okay.
hands. No,
Hello?
the guy with the, sorry, the gentleman with the hat. He was the first one, just to be fair to him.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Muhammad Ali Brar from University of the Punjab, PhD scholar. Sir, my question is to Dr. Ishrat Hussain Saab. In order to control inflation in Pakistan economy, State Bank of Pakistan raises policy rate. But if we look at the structure of the Pakistan economy, it is mostly non-credit economy, unlike US economy. So why State Bank always consider to raise policy rate in order to counter rising inflation rate, while we have to bear low growth later? Is IMF not enough wise that Pakistan economy is non-credit economy and they direct us to raise policy rates? Thank you, sir.
The interest rate works both for the savers as well as the borrowers. And if you do not pay a decent interest rate, which is positive in real terms, you won't have the savings. And the savings derive investment. If your savings are lower than investment, then you have to borrow, and you get into indebtedness. So the purpose of interest rate is to mop up the money which is in cash and outside the financial sector and bring them into the financial sector in order to provide credit to the private sector to undertake investment and expand the economy. That is the purpose why interest rate is very critical, because it acts as savings. Bangladesh had the same savings rate as we have, and now they have gone to 30% savings. So they don't have to borrow from anywhere. They have enough domestic resources in order to finance that. So that's the link between the interest rates, savings, and investment.
Okay. Should
Okay. Just a reminder, I know we have a very knowledgeable celebrity on our panel, and you want to ask him questions on many topics. I remind that the theme is impact evaluations, but happy to have questions on other topics. Thanks. So the lady there first, then the gentleman standing.
I am Sadaf Nisar from
track.
Punjab University.
Okay. Okay.
My question is from Dr. Ishrat Saab. When we make the policy regarding education and health sector, and we construct the new public colleges and schools, we mostly construct them without any prior grounds. Like I know certain colleges constructed in Wazirabad divisions, there is only enrollment of 50 students and 4 teachers are serving there. So all the resources we have spent there for the constructions of new schools and colleges, I think they are going waste. So I think for the hiring, same as for the doctors, I think we know well that to serve at the distant places, there are some migrant and demographic constraints. So I think there should be a policy to hire them, the skilled labor. The relevant persons should be hired there so they do not want to get transfers to their hometowns.
You're echoing exactly what I said in my remarks, that we construct, and I am a guilty party. I was Secretary Planning and Development Department in Sindh, and I approved as the chairman of the Provincial Development Working Party hundreds of schools to be located somewhere without realizing that whether there is a demand for schools there, whether there will be teachers there, but this is the system. And I give you the other example. When you devolve powers of education and health to the grassroots level, you will find that the resource allocation is optimal and the waste is almost zero. And I can illustrate this. I went to Shikarpur where I started my career, and I said I'll observe what district council members are debating. And you know, one councillor stood up and said, there is no girls' school in my village, so why don't you construct a girls' school there? The second councillor stood up and said, oh, we have a building, a teacher, and a school, but there are very few girls. So why don't you construct a pathway connecting your school, your village and my village, so that your girls can come in? Now, can anybody sitting in a planning department in Karachi or Islamabad think about what the real situation at the ground is? And that's why we want education and health, nutrition, drinking water supply, sewerage to be devolved to the local communities and local government. That is the solution to the problem.
Sir, I have one more question on cash transfers. Isn't it a short-term solution?
I want to echo what the chairman has said. This is a session on impact evaluation. I have two very distinguished panelists. You can ask me after the session. I'm willing to talk to you, but please confine to the session itself.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I should speak now. So my question is regarding impact evaluation. As being a PhD student, I read a lot about impact evaluation. Mostly these evaluation is being done by these donors like World Bank or ADBs. And I have seen there's a complexity in social world, but our impact evaluation does not incorporate these things. Let's suppose this evaluation is, okay, we have a particular intervention or X policy, it have given Y results. Unfortunately, I have seen these evaluation doesn't tell us under what mechanism, how these policies has been successful or why these has been failed, and to whom it served. Let's suppose there was one World Bank evaluation, it has been done by someone from Harvard. They said, okay, low-cost private school worked in Sindh and it increased student access. Later we have seen the government has changed these policies. So yes, that policy might work for donors, that also work for government in order to save money, but this policy couldn't work for teachers because they are being hired at very low cost. They easily switch these kind of jobs. So, so my concern as well as question, how we have a certain approaches or methodologies we apply in impact evaluation which can work for all stakeholders and which give true result where everyone can read, not only it should be part of some repository.
Do you want to take this one? Or Dr. Shane?
Thanks. See, the flip side of having a celebrity panelist is that they get all the tough questions then, and we can just sit back and relax. But, So so that's a interesting question, and that ties into some of the challenges that I wanted to outline, but I didn't get a chance to do so in my comments. See, to some extent you're right. The problem is that often in Pakistan, the evaluations are being done by consultants, right, and not necessarily academics. Those reports, so one has to be very careful. I'm not trying to say that what consulting work is bad, but the thing is that one has to be careful because the incentives are sort of misaligned, right? So for academics, the incentives are that you have to go through a rigorous peer review. So whatever you do has to be evaluated by your peers, and then academics are interested in then getting the papers into some good journals, right? So you want your paper in the AR or QGE, blah, blah, blah. The consultants are not necessarily, those aren't their kind of targets, right? So they're sort of demand driven, they're responding to a particular ask, and what that does is that increases the risk of what we call statistical malfeasance, right? Or in like sort of normal lingo, p-hacking, where you go and start data mining and trying to then start looking for kind of effects, even though they might not exist. But then, you just sort of try to hack the data to kind of show effects or not. So one has to be very, very careful there. And I think that one way of getting beyond or sort of addressing the point that you raised is to make sure, is to kind of invest in a rigorous peer review process for evaluations that are being done on projects in the country. This can be managed through academic institutions, or you can incentivize these people to, get these papers published in international journals where then they automatically get access to good peer review.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm pleased to be a part of this insightful discussion. My question is from Dr. Nizam. As you mentioned that it's not enough to just build schools, and there's a need to create motivation among the among the people to avail that, to go to the schools and avail the education. So my question was that how will you create that motivation among the people who are living every day to meet their survival needs? Thank you.
Even from the tribal areas of Pakistan have clearly shown that there is a demand for education, even for girls' education, among the most conservative societies. So there is no question. There was a question some times ago, but all the evidence today shows that right from the Khyber Agency down to, Tata, there is now a great demand for education and even girls' education. So it's a supply side phenomena. And the government has the resources which the private sector or NGOs cannot actually match. So what is the partnership which will work? The local governments should make the assessment of the needs of their own areas, and they should construct the buildings according to the requirements, whether it is for just primary school, or it is both primary and middle school, or it is up to the high school. Let them decide. They construct the building, they equip it, but let the teachers' recruitment and operation and management be given to the private sector or the NGO, because they have more flexibility than the government can. Secretary Education sitting in Karachi cannot really supervise or inspect what is happening in Jacobabad, but a Jacobabad district council can do that. So that is the partnership. And I call this all hands on the deck approach. You don't just blame the government, or you don't blame the private sector, you don't blame the NGOs, but let's all work together in order to do what we can do the best. That is a solution to bringing in these out-of-school children into our system.
Okay, let's go for a last round. Yes, gentleman was waiting.
Thank you very much. My name is Munawar Hamid Mangalwala. I am from PF Keat University. I'm in academics for many years. At first, I would like to express thanks to Dr. Laila and team of Dr. Laila for this conference, as well as thank you very much to you people as well. I'm in education for the last more than 25 years. And Dr. Saab se mulaqat hoti rehti hai hamesha conferences mein. My question is to Dr. Saab, you, and to Dr. Sawal as well. I tried my level best because it's about policy implementation. I tried my level best when I was completing my master's. At that time, I studied a book, Meeks and Meeks in Accounting. आज भी वो किताब different universities में पढ़ाई जाती है same. I tried my level best to bring all universities at one page in such a way that we should teach to our students local cases, local good books. Now, something about policy making. For example, SARS is a program, but my children, they do not know that what exactly the SARS program is, because of no teacher, I doubt, that either from IBA or from LUMS or from any university has put this specific program in the course book or in some notes in such a way that students come to know that what SARS program is. So how can you, Dr. Saab, how can you suggest, I want your suggestion, that there should be a program whenever a new policy comes and the policy is open, it should be given to students and the students should come to know about that thing, how it is possible. Thank you very much.
I was going to defer the space to you in case you had comments on this, because you haven't had a chance to kind of speak in the Q&A, so.
I think although the question has been directed to the distinguished panelists, but yes, you are right. I myself is doing PhD. I discuss with such questions with my professors even. None of the topics which particularly generate in public sector debates like impact evaluation, different programs, other things, even they are not talked about what to say about research. So from implementers' point of view and practitioners' point of view, what is my fair idea while sitting in government is that people in academia as well as in public sector, they wait for first step to be taken by government to interact with academia, or donor push academia to do certain things. It is not for the academia. Academia has assumed that it is not us that they'll take the first step in order to have evaluation or some research on different interventions being done in public sector policy, making their implementation, their impacts. So it is not that complex thing, but this is how we are, systematized, that academia looks at private sector looks at government. So and everybody is waiting who has to take first step. There are collaborations with the help of academia as well as donors. They have initiated such kind of debates. As far as Government of Sindh is concerned, IBA is our partner, ZEBIS is our partner. With the help of even World Bank and other organizations, a tripartite kind of situation has already been there, but it is not up to the mark, as you are seeing that majority of students are doing research, and their research can further feed in to the policy making. It is not just one part that research to be done by the university students, but their research is getting into the policy making is another part where work has to be done.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end. We have 2 minutes left, so one quick last question, because you had your hand, please.
So the panel is very enriched. There is an implementer, there is an advisor, there is a partner, and there is an evaluator sitting over there. If we look into the education, over the last 3 to 4 decades, there is a marginal improvement. So my very simple question, what went wrong with these evaluations? So from implementation, from advising, from partner, or from evaluating point of view. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Nasser from PIDE.
Thank you very much. I think we need to end here. Anyone would like, I mean, that's a big question, what went wrong with education? And I mean, the numbers are, yes, they're still not good, but we cannot say from the numbers that there haven't been major increase in enrollment, reduction of the gap between boys and girls attainment. So it's not a black picture, a totally black picture. But still, what do we know from the evaluations on what went wrong to education? And we'll end with this.
Okay, it's a tough question because as you mentioned, I'm the evaluator. The implementers are, I guess, to my left. But I think there's definitely frictions between the evidence that's being generated and how it then seeps into policy circles, and how committed policymakers are to actually accepting that evidence and then using that to inform their own work. I mean, that's a bigger challenge. The thing with evaluators, by the way, and this goes back to this question somebody raised in a similar panel yesterday, was what drives us is not necessarily policy making, by the way. We're just, we're basically sitting at universities, we're interested in generating new knowledge, new ideas, and this is what really appeals to us, right? And if policymakers end up working with us and adopting these ideas, so it's like a win-win situation. But if they don't, we'll move on to some other interesting questions and start answering other interesting or addressing other problems, right? So at the end, it's, the onus doesn't necessarily fall on our shoulders. The onus is on the policymakers to really commit to working with us, and absorbing the evidence that we generate, and then incorporating them into their work.
On these final wise words, I'd like to thank the panel for the participation, and thank you all for attending and for good questions. And thank you very much.